Well, good afternoon, or evening, or whatever it is for you at this time. So we're now going to switch gears and start talking about materialism. Now, make sure you have, the text with you, because this video is going to, talk about lines in the text. Now, Aristotle, who we are switching to now, we've been talking about Plato, is going to argue for materialism. Notice material, right? And so Aristotle's ultimate opinion is going to be that what is real is something physical. And where he's going with this is ultimately that all reality begins with substance. Substance. And so that is where we are going to ultimately end up, is a discussion of the centrality of substance. Now, he begins, however, on page 195 of the categories, right? So we're talking about the categories. Look at the very first little chapter on page 195. So this would be like 1A1. He says, if things only have a name in common and the account of the essence corresponds with the name is different for each, they're called homonyms, etc., etc. So this is what he means. Take anything, tree. There is both a name and an essence that are involved in tree. Now the name is simply the sound associated with the concept, right? And so tree doesn't have to actually be the sound R-E-E, right? With the thing. We could call it arb, we could call it anything, we could call it chuck-a-doo-doo, it doesn't really matter. But the name tree in English is simply a sound that is used ultimately to name the essence, which is the whatness, or the what the thing is. So in other words, we categorize all tree-ish things into the essence of tree by using the name tree. Does that make sense? So cup is nothing but a name, right? But the name indicates the essence of cupness, which is what? Instruments that hold liquids or something. So this is the first thing to realize. And he talks about this on this page, and it's sort of grammatical, but it's sort of important as well, because ultimately grammar is the logic of language, and language is really the only way that we know things. And so he continues getting really sort of intricate and confusing, right? And seriously, this was not the easiest stuff to comprehend. But it gets heavy into grammar. And look, for instance, at chapter 2. So this would be like line 20, line 1A 20, 195. Among beings, some are said of a subject, but are not in any subject. Man, for example, is said of a subject, an individual man, but is not in any subject. Some are in a subject, but are not said of any subject, etc. So this is what he means. He says, first of all, beings. Right? Could you be any more general, right, and vague? So that's what he means by that, is things, because if something is a thing, it exists. Remember, being comes from the verb to be, which has to do with existence. So all existing things, right, are either, as he says, said of a subject, but not in a subject, or, and seriously, this does sound, I know, like a bunch of word games, but there's a point, and once you see the point, it'll make sense. Some are in a subject, but not said of a subject. What was the other one? Among beings, some are said of a subject, but are not in any subject. For example, man is said of a subject, an individual man, but is not in any subject. Some are in a subject, but not said of any subject. So the opposite. All right, what the heck does he mean? First of all, we've got to realize that he's making sort of a grammatical statement, and said of is weird. Take any sentence. Let me write a sentence. I'm going to switch colors here. So let's say we say that Bob is a man. First of all, this is a man stuff, right? This is called a predicate. And Bob is the subject, right? Let's go subject. So you could say a man is predicated of Bob. When I say Bob is a man, I'm saying that this can be said of this. So to predicate means to say of a subject. Okay, so let that sink in for a second. So man is said of Bob. In other words, here's the category, the logical category of man, and we're going to go ahead and stick Bob in that category. Make sense? But ultimately you have a subject, you have a predicate. Now, if he, Aristotle, is saying some things are said of a subject but not in a subject, this is what he means. Again, let's use the example of Bob. So if I'm going to say Bob is a man, now notice that here the man is said of Bob, but the man is not in Bob. It's actually the other way around. We would stick Bob in the concept of man, right? But the idea is sort of this. We can say man of Bob, but the thing is, man exists only as a logical category. We can say it of Bob, but we could also say it of Tom, Dick, and Harry. We also could put them in this subject because man is only said. It's not actually in Bob. So we look at Bob and we see what Bob is and then classify him as this. But ultimately, this manness is only an idea and only a class of things, if that makes sense. And it is said of him, but it's not in him. Now, if we were to look at the bottom one, and we're going to say that Bob, is like tall. Let's switch our thing and we say that Bob is tall. Now this time, the tallness is actually in Bob himself. And so the only reason I can tell that Bob is tall is I look at him, and in a way, I can't take the tallness off of Bob. Without Bob being there, there is no tallness to associate with Bob. So in this case, we would say that tall is in a subject, but it's not said of a subject, because we have to see Bob in order to see the tallness. The point that he's trying to make is this. Whether I say that Bob is tall or Bob is a man, this is the important thing. Bob has to exist first. First, there must be a Bob, because without the Bob, there's no tallness in which I could see Bob and say that he's tall. Without Bob, I would not have that thing to make me think of this class of man with which to understand Bob. So at the end of the day, where ultimately he's going is, in all predicates, in all sentences, in other words, in all knowledge, everything starts with the subject. So without the subject, there is nothing else. We cannot talk about tallness and manness without first there being the subject Bob to talk about, if that kind of makes sense. So that's the first thing. And so then what that tells us is, here in the categories, that we're not going to have any knowledge of men unless we have knowledge of guys like Bob. In other words, yes, there's a difference between name and essence and all that kind of stuff, but we only have essences. In other words, we only know things because we see them, basically, right? And so the acquisition of language is all about basically looking at things, experiencing physical things, substances, as you'll say, and then putting them in categories. Now, he talks about, in number 4, the categories of being. So this is chapter 4, it's still on page 195. This would be in line 1b25. And he says, of things said without combination, each signifies either substance or quantity or quality or relative or where or when, etc., etc. In other words, if something is, they must be, if something exists, it exists in one of these categories. It has to be. But notice the first 3. The first 3 categories are substance, quantity, and quality. And what these mean is this. Quality refers to things you can experience about something. I'm going to go with sense, so I don't have to write out experience. So the qualities of something would be the colors, the sounds, the shapes, the smells, that kind of stuff. Qualia in Latin, which means visible. Quantity refers to the how much or how many. In other words, you're talking about the mass or the dimensions or the number of something. And then substance, this is weird. Substance, there's, it's a compound word. Sub meaning under, and the stance comes from the Latin word for stand. So substance is that which stands under. And it's weird, but here's the gig. In other words, that which stands under change is what's meant. So take something like this. Whoops, change is spelled with an A, is it not? So you could think about a cat. No, you know what? Let's use a tree because they're much easier. So here's our tree, right? So the substance of the tree, here's the gig. It can change its size, right? It can change its color. It can change its shape even, correct? It may be rough, it may be, smooth, whatever. But the tree itself still remains as a substance, as it were. So though these things can change, size, color, shape, the tree aspect can't, the substance can't. So what he's getting us to understand or to see here is that if something exists, quantity is related to substance. So you can only know the mass of the tree if the substance tree is there. You can only know quality if the substance tree is there to appear to you in certain colors and shapes. And all these other things, the relative, the where, the when, the location, all those other things that, well, we're not going to really delve into, they too don't exist unless first and foremost substance exists. Which is why he says on page 196, line 35 there, 2a35, all other things are said of the primary subjects as subjects or are in them as subjects. This is evident if we examine particular cases, etc. Next paragraph, hence, all other things are said of primary substances as subjects or are in them as subjects. So, the idea is, ultimate reality is primary substance. Without the primary substance, you got nothing. Therefore, reality is physical.